Hi, welcome to our live stream where we're talking about estate planning for women. I have Jenny with us. She's an estate attorney and elder care attorney, and we're going to simplify things for you so it's easier for you to create your estate plan because I know how much women we focus so much on other people that we don't focus on ourselves, and the importance of estate planning is so important. Welcome. Thank you, Jenny, for having being here and talking about estate planning.
Yeah, I love to be here. And I love that you're spending some time having some girl power over in Chicago at the moment. I feel like it's so perfect for this chat.
Well, I was thinking about on the plane as, unfortunately, there's been a lot of plane accidents lately. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, at least three people I know I'm on this flight. So there's not, at least any issues. But you really start to think about, accidents happen everywhere. We can't just put ourselves with saran wrap. Well, but I guess you can saran wrap ourselves and keep each other in dens and huddle ourselves. But we need to really be thinking about our estate planning and who's going to take care of us when something really happens.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think that saran wrap is going to protect us for too long. So I always have to sprinkle in that dose of reality of like, it's like when my clients will say like, now Jenny, if I pass away, I'm like, it's not if, it's when. Change that word. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, we don't plan our death. We don't plan when we're going to be incapacitated. Um, but we can plan for our state to happen.
yeah,
And we can plan ahead of time to protect us and our loved ones in case something happens.
yeah, yeah. So I don't know where you want me to start. I can just kind of, see where the conversation takes us. Anywhere in particular that you want me to start.
Yeah, great question. So I was thinking about starting, why do women need estate planning?
Yeah, I was when you kind of sent me those questions that we're going to kind of kick off our conversation. I was thinking about that conversation or thinking about that question, and it's not one I've even ever thought through in my head, honestly. And at the same time, where my brain went when I was thinking about that was, I think as women, we are typically faced with I'm going to call them like gaps in careers. So whether it's due to family planning, due to caregiving, um, all at the same time, we're just trying to keep our head above water. So we're balancing all of these priorities in life, and at the same time, someone like me is trying to say, hey, you also need to get your estate plan done as well. And I think I think at the sorry, I'm getting a little background noise. I think at the same time, eventually we have to prioritize ourselves. I think we all know that. And sorry, it's really it's really difficult to hear. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. So yeah, that's where my head went, was really eventually we have to prioritize ourselves, even though we are also prioritizing caregiving and our families and things like that. But at the same time, eventually these documents are going to be necessary. And unfortunately, if we don't have our documents in place, then we could be in a world of hurt. So, and I think that's things everyone knows.
Yeah, and I think as women, we're like, so many things are kind of like taken at us. It's like we got to pick the kids up from school. We have to make the lunches. We have to, um, it's like we have all these things on our plate that we put on our plate. Where does estate planning fit into that?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's kind of what I mean. That um, you know, one of the things say I'm at a event, a party or something with around a group of people, and if someone's like, "Oh, what do you do?" and I tell them I'm an estate attorney, 9 out of 10 times the response that I get is, "Oh, I need to get my will done," or "Oh, I need to update my will." And so I think
Well, I know, and
societally,
this is
we
where I think
know
the
that these are
dealers
very
have
important
well,
things.
and this is part of what I
And
find too, where
eventually
I
people
tend to
have to
get
just
like that's
prioritize it
kind
and
of other
say,
things
okay,
that like I think
I'm going to
you
stop writing that on the
don't
to-do
understand and
list.
Cam had a
I'm
different
going to
and Cam is working
eventually
with
take
his team
action
and we're
and,
coming in like what are we missing and
contact
we
an
feel like I
attorney
felt
or
like
whatever to really
oh
get
I'm so
that.
behind and I thought I was working ahead and
So
I think some of it is really on their end like shady.
if I'm a woman, like just hypothetical situation, I am a woman. What are some things? Where do I even start? And like I know for like our daughter, we've been starting like the guardianship paperwork, and it's like, who do I even trust to get that done? Who's going to feel reliable enough to even that I can trust to get this paperwork done properly and really think about my interest in mine?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I guess it depends on the kind of person that you are. There are sometimes people where they're just kind of lifetime learners. Like they really want to absorb a lot of information, whether that be through YouTube videos or through blogs or, any kind of content that someone like that can gather. Alternatively, there's other people where, they're kind of like, I know this needs to get done, and I trust you, and I just want to kind of get moving. So I really think the first step is, and I know something that you wanted to talk about, Danielle, was really kind of the my thoughts or the differences of working with an
Yeah.
attorney versus like an
Yeah.
online platform. Um,
This was good though. I'm glad we
so
were
that's something that we can talk about, but eventually, someone has to say, I'm gonna take this
I
with
will.
and either,
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate
gather
that.
more information or I'm gonna, start working with someone and eventually, get the plan done. So, yeah.
So if I'm looking at the to-do list for myself of like where do I even start with estate planning? Um, what are some basic documents that I need to get done so I'm protecting myself?
Yeah, I consider a very, very basic estate plan to consist of like 3 or 4 um, specific documents. And I should use this as a perfect opportunity to say that I am only licensed in Indiana. A lot of these estate laws, though, are somewhat similar across the country between different states. And I say that because, like here in Indiana, there are 4 documents that I consider to be the 4 basic that every estate plan should really consist of. There's the living will declaration, which is an end of life document where you specifically designate whether you would want artificial nutrition and hydration. There's also an appointment of healthcare representative, which is just a really fancy name for who's making healthcare decisions for you if you are unable to do so. There are some states that like group both of those documents into one. So just know that kind of one umbrella of this like basic estate plan is like all things healthcare. So like who's making healthcare decisions for us, as well as like kind of yucky end of life decisions as well. The second group is what's called a power of attorney. Um, that is really someone that you designate to address any kind of legal or financial decision making while you're living, and that's a real big misconception. It's while you're living only, and they are tasked with kind of like keeping your bills afloat, filing taxes if something has happened, and you need someone to step in and take care of that sort of stuff. So that's my second little umbrella. And then my third umbrella is the last will and testament, which is probably the most well-known document out there in my little world. And what I always tell people is, wills can be like 3 or 4 pages. They can be like 50 pages. But even in those 50-page wills, wills really do 2 things. They say who gets your stuff, so who are your beneficiaries, and who's in charge, so the executor. So when I think of a basic estate plan, I think of a plan that addresses those 3 things. Anything beyond that is kind of just cherry on top, or maybe someone has a goal of, say, avoiding probate or gaining asset protection. Um, those things, typically can't be done just through those basic documents I just talked about, but all good estate plans start with those core documents at the very, very, ground level.
So, if I'm someone who is thinking about getting their estate planning and I don't really have anybody that I can rely on to fulfill the positions of like a power of attorney or an executor, who do you suggest looking into?
Yeah, that is more common than people realize it is, and I think that really does go back to the topic of this episode, even more so of, if say we have a single woman, whether they have children is in the picture or not. I think a lot of people gravitate towards family and putting family members or spouses, if we are married or partners. um, but the takeaway I want people to know is it doesn't have to be family either. I have a lot of clients, that will put dear friends in some of these roles, especially if they have especially if they don't have children, if they're not married, or maybe they're widowed, and or maybe their children they're estranged from. These kind of scenarios happen way more than I think people think. And what I would want people to know is that it doesn't always have to be family. And I don't want that to be a stumbling block or a hurdle for someone doing their estate planning. That's a conversation I'm very used to helping people navigate, of just kind of looking beyond just our, immediate family unit.
And how would you go about doing that?
The conversation piece.
Yeah.
I typically start with, inviting them to look more around their circle than just the family. So whether it be friends, even whether it's like, nieces or nephews, like more distant family members. Beyond that, if I continue striking out, if I have a client that says, Jenny, I just don't have anyone. I mean, I hear you, but I don't have anyone, or maybe they don't want to burden, maybe they do have a niece or nephew, but they're like, I don't want to burden that with them. There are professional organizations that will serve in these roles for people. Um, I always tell people that I encourage clients to like look in their circle first, look at their family, look at their friends before going there, because typically those come with a cost. And some people are fine and dandy with paying for a service like that. But at the same time, if we can just be creative and find someone kind of near and dear to us that doesn't have to be family, that's always where I go to first. But that's always a nice backstop, is some sort of professional service, um, serving in those roles.
What do you think about the idea of having someone temporarily as your power of attorney until you've really figured out who the power attorney is?
Say more about what you mean. I'm not sure.
So, for example, maybe my life has currently transitioned where maybe my mom was the power of attorney, but she recently passed away for me.
Okay.
And now I'm kind of looking at, who's next, maybe putting like a friend in that position for the time being until I've solidified who I really want to be my power of attorney, because you want someone in that position there.
Yeah.
But who is that going to be? And that's a really hard decision to make.
Yeah, it is. And I can really speak to that because, while I'm married, my husband and I don't have children. And so typically, like, I'll, use myself as an example for this. Right now, my husband and I have each of our parents as successors for each other in a lot of these documents. But there's going to come a time where our parents are going to be best suited for that position due to their age or due to their health or whatever. And so at that point, we're going to have to get creative with, okay, now who are we going to start looking at? Siblings, who, all of our siblings have their own lives. They have kids and working and all that good stuff. So, your question being kind of putting someone as like I'm going to call it like a Band-Aid for now.
Yeah.
You know, the stinky part of that is any kind of changes to these documents are likely going to require a new document. And so I typically try to, it's probably a perfect example of why I typically encourage people of, okay, when we get these documents created, I'm a big fan of listing successors down. So, okay, if we want to list mom first, well, what if something happens to mom? Let's go ahead and list a successor. That way you don't have to boomerang back to me and create a new document and there's already a successor that's designated. But at the end of the day, it still does require that decision of who are we going to list as successor. And I can help people navigate kind of looking for people around them to best serve in some of these roles. Simultaneously, though, I always tell clients, I also don't know your family. I don't know your friends. And so if I walked by any of them on the road, I'm not going to know them. And so I can help you kind of stretch your brain to think of beyond just maybe like your immediate family, but beyond that, I can share kind of the best skill sets that these people, maybe should possess. And beyond that, that's a decision ultimately the client has to make of who is going to serve in these roles. So it doesn't make it any easier, but unless people just want to throw names in a hat and start picking out of the hat, but I don't recommend that.
What is your idea regarding asking that friend, do you mind being my power of attorney, and listing out the role of what that includes? Because that can be a really hard role for many people to take. They don't realize it coming into it. And then they're like, oops, I didn't realize that I would have to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I think it's especially hard because asking that friend is also a little bit like playing the game of telephone. Because, you and I, Danielle, we do this, we, talk about this, nerdy financial stuff all day, every day. But, my friends that aren't in this kind of field, them trying to communicate like what a power of attorney does and is responsible for, that's going to be hard. And so it's a little bit like playing the game of telephone in a way. But if we're specifically, talking about, a very specific role, what I would be telling the client if they ask me that question would be, just kind of explain it more generally. Like, okay, if something happens to me, I'm still living, but someone needs to step in and, start taking care of my finances, my bills, filing taxes. Would that be something that you, friend, would be willing to do? I think a lot of people also don't realize that these roles can be compensated too. I find a lot of people don't take a fee because they're so darn nice and they're like, oh, I'm not going to take a fee. This is my friend, this is my sister, this is my kid, this is my mom, whoever. But they can't be compensated. And I encourage people to compensate themselves because it does take a lot of time and energy in serving in all of these roles.
How have you structured that in the past?
Structure the fee aspect?
The fee. Mm-hmm.
There's two different kind of rules of thumb. One rule of thumb where professionals sometimes, so when I say professionals, what I mean in these roles are things like banks, trust companies, sometimes attorneys, sometimes accountants. Sometimes those professional service providers serving in these roles, they will charge a percentage of the estate to serve in some of these roles. There's pros and cons about that. And we would be on here for like 3 hours if we went down that rabbit hole. But one rule of thumb is like the percentage method. That is typical. And when I say percentage, I'm talking percentage of the estate that they're managing. That is I typically see that more with like banks and trust companies, if I'm being honest. Alternatively, hourly is often the way people will be compensated. And it just has to be reasonable. That's what most states say, is it has to be reasonable. There's no like perfect like equation computation that states have to say like, oh, because you have this degree and this years of experience in serving as a power of attorney, your fee is X. That doesn't really exist. And so it really typically depends on someone's skill set. Have they served as a power of attorney before? Are they a trained accountant? Are they a trained banker? Or, do they have next to no experience at this? And that's not good or bad. It just is. And so that's it. That's the kind of the stuff that, we weigh as part of coming up with an hourly rate. It's a tough thing because sometimes people feel guilty about taking a fee. And then I encourage them to do so. And then if they take a fee, there are checks and balances there too for people, if there's kids or beneficiaries. If it is an unreasonable fee, there's a lot of litigation about that as well as, they charged too much or they didn't track their time appropriately. And so, there's a lot there for sure. Lawyers will never be going out of business. That's what that means.
Well, when you were talking about it, I was thinking about the liability of being a power of attorney and the checks and balances that come with that, of documentation and making sure that you're really looking out for the person's best interest and the stress of making all those decisions.
Yeah, it's a high liability position. I always say there's a whole list of like duties that a power of attorney or an executor or a trustee, fiduciary duties that they're supposed to be following. And I typically I typically describe them as like, a lot of them are like kind of gut check things, like where it's like, if it doesn't feel right, then it's probably not right. If you have to, even for 3 seconds, question something, it's probably not okay. But that's also why a lot of those people sometimes will hire an attorney to represent them, not because things are, like litigious, or not because not because people are fighting, but because they're like, well, I don't want to do something silly or stupid, so I'm going to have someone represent me to, make sure I'm doing things appropriately. So, it is a high liability position. And at the same time, a lot of the work that you do is a lot of very like, you would know, like, no, you can't take money, and like you can't borrow money again. Like it's all that kind of like, it's like, well, duh. that's probably not going to be kosher. Yeah.
So going beyond kind of like the power of attorney role, and then now assigning an executor onto the state, because that can be two different people or the same people.
Yeah.
And then when you're thinking about creating what you want to pass down to the next generation, and how can you protect yourself? Like my grandmother's mentality was like, I'm dead, I don't really care.
Yeah.
But many people come into it of, I really care about the next generation. I really care about the people who are around me. How can I make it most easiest for them when I pass away?
Yeah. And I think, one, to confirm something, the power of attorney executor are very different roles. So they can be different people. So if you wanted your friend John to serve as your power of attorney and your friend Jane to serve as executor, you totally could list different people. I do typically find that people will list the same person though, because the skill sets that both of those roles should possess are very similar. And so I find most people will list the same person in both of those roles. And then beyond that, I mean, there's definitely the school of thought of, Jenny, what do I care? I'll be dead. That is probably the sentence I hear the most in my conference room, because I consider it my job to think of like all the what ifs. Like, okay, what if this person dies? Okay, what if something happens to this person? What if this person becomes incapacitated? Like, I have to plug all those little holes. And sometimes people are like, Jenny, stop with the questions. What do I care? I'll be dead. But I think on the other side, there are a whole lot of people that they make appointments with someone like me because it is so important for them to not leave behind a mess. They take great pride in what they leave behind for their family. And in those situations, it's, one, they actually have an estate plan done. And two, they've kept it up to date, because a lot of mistakes happen when estate plans aren't kept up to date as well. And so, um, yeah, I definitely see both. I definitely see both of those people all the time.
And when you're pondering with going with a relationship with a state attorney like you versus just going with the software
Hmm.
and plugging information is, how is the experience different, and what would make the determining factor of which one to go with?
Yeah, I think I take a little bit of a unique opinion, I think, on this topic. I think if you asked 10 attorneys what their thoughts are on online platforms, I'm gonna guess 8 or 9 of the 10 will be like, no, no, you can't, you shouldn't use them. Um, I take the mindset of there's nothing I can do to eradicate people eradicate these platforms. Like, people are going to use these platforms. And I'm forever going to be an advocate for getting documents in the hands of more people, because there are way too many people that become incapacitated or pass away without an estate plan for lots of different reasons. But one of the biggest reasons is financially. There's a lot of people that can't afford someone like me. I would actually, I mean, I don't have statistics for this, but I venture to say a majority of our country may not be able to afford working with someone like me. And while there are a lot of great organizations and bar associations that lawyers will provide these sort of documents, either free or very reduced. A lot of times those organizations put caps on, like, you only get this free or reduced if your income or your assets fall below X, which then leaves another gap of people of, like, they have too much or make too much, but like they don't have like just thousands of dollars to devote to doing an estate plan. There's those people, and these platforms are going to get those people more access to these kind of documents. And so I will be an advocate for that forever and ever. What people have to know and understand is there is a level of risk with everything we do. I could easily make that argument, but there's a level of risk when you work with those platforms of not not having the counseling piece of, if you do X, the consequence is going to be Y and Z. You have to just truly look at these platforms as data entry, and that is it. And if that makes someone nervous pervous, if that makes you anxious, then utilizing an attorney that's going to give you that level of counseling perhaps is the way to go. Um, it's also a great resource for people that, like, hey, I just want to get like maybe some basic documents done right now, and like I'm just going to, you know, deal with more planning later. Again, those platforms are going to get those documents in the hands of more people in that kind of situation too. So as long as people understand that, I'm good. Totally good.
So we as humans all make mistakes. It's bound to happen. Inputting something into a system, there can be mistakes. Inputting, having a state attorney as talented in their expertise is, we're all human. Many people just take those documents and just put it on a shelf and call it a day.
Yep.
What is your suggestion for those people who have those documents on the shelf and have not looked at it in years, and it's just collecting dust?
Make 2025 the year you pull it off the shelf. That's what it was. I one of the questions I always get is, Jenny, how often do I need to update my estate plan? And that's I have found myself, I'm like a weird little unicorn in my profession, because I tend to don't give like the traditional answers. It bodes well for me, so I'm just rolling with it. Here's what I'll say. I don't like to give like, you need to update your estate plan every 5 years or every 10 years. Life is fast, and so I tend to say big life events tend to impact your estate plan, and big life events happen sometimes earlier than 5 years or earlier than 10 years, but sometimes there's no big life events after 5 years, 10 years. And so what I'd encourage people to more, I guess, look at and put more stock in is those kind of big life events. So what I'm talking about: retirement, new kids, if you're a young family, new grandkids, divorces, deaths. I got an inheritance. Though my grandchild has been diagnosed with some sort of special needs, like those are big. These are the big life events I'm talking about. And I'd rather see people, when they have those big life events, say, "Oh, this may impact my plan." If that doesn't work for people's brains, then I would say, okay, then pull out the plan every 5 or 10 years and, go through it. But that's how I tend to answer that question. Is it's big life events. That's what's going to impact your plan. Otherwise, these documents, typically don't have like an expiration date. And so I have seen documents be massively outdated, but I've seen documents be like 40 years old and they're still fine and dandy, because the family structure, I mean, everything is just kind of relatively the same. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I always answer that tough one.
Yeah. Usually when I have clients that have major life changes, that's kind of when we revisit estate planning. But I also think it's important from my perspective we every year change slightly,
Yeah.
and updating what our goals look like and updating who we are and our values is important. As well as, I don't know if you've seen a lot of shifts in the law changes in estate planning of, maybe you're lucky to be in a state where estate laws don't change very frequently, but maybe you're in a state where, it changed more rapidly.
Yeah.
And so from my perspective, I think, yes, major life changes are important to revisit, but also it doesn't hurt to have an estate attorney just revisit it every, couple of years to 5 years, just to make sure that it's exactly what you're looking for and how your values and goals have shifted as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point, because when clients go through my office, we talk to them very intentionally through our process that this is not a transaction to us. Our best relationships are relationships. Our best, client attorney relationships are truly a relationship. And really to encourage that constant communication, as well as us to be a resource for people that are concerned about, changes in the law or whatever. We actually have an optional program in our office where after people sign their documents, they can elect to, it's called our maintenance program. And basically they can pay us an annual fee and they can make changes to their documents. They can come in for whatever review meetings that they want. We will notify them of any changes in the law that impact their documents. That program gives people a lot of peace of mind. And so I bring that up from a place of, if anyone watches this that, is encouraged to do a plan, or may already have a plan, perhaps maybe that's something that you add to kind of the list of, as you're searching for someone to partner with in this whole estate planning space, see if they have a specific process around, maintaining that relationship and not looking at it just as a transaction. You're probably going to have the best luck finding someone like that only does this kind of field. Someone that's going to look at this as a transaction is perhaps going to be, an attorney that dabbles in, kind of maybe several different fields, and, may help, with a client with a divorce, and may help a different client with their DUI, and may write a will for you. Those kind of attorneys, they're very much well needed for society to be able to address all the legal issues people have. At the same time, they're not going to have any kind of very likely not going to have any kind of program really to promote that relationship and not just have it be a transaction.
So, what kind of questions would you ask an estate attorney that you're meeting to ensure that it's not just a transactional relationship? It's you're getting to know that person, they're getting to know you, kind
Yeah.
of relationship.
Well, I think for starters, I would definitely. I mean, maybe it's just because this is what I do day in and day out, but I can very quickly tell, if I have someone, a prospect or a client, say, "Hey, do John Smith attorney? He's the one that wrote my estate plan 15 years ago," and I look up John Smith attorney's website. And if their practice areas have a lot of different fields, or if John Smith attorney does a lot of different stuff, I hope that the law firm lawyer space continues to gravitate towards attorneys declaring kind of like, okay, this is my wheelhouse and this is what I'm going to stay in. Unfortunately, when we come out of law school, we can kind of do whatever we want. So that there's, again, I won't even go down that rabbit hole, but there's pros and cons to that, because there's a whole lot of small towns in this country that need that general practice attorney to support the community. I just have a lot of concerns around trying, that attorney staying up to date and current on all the laws, on all the things. So I think for starters, definitely finding someone that only does this stuff, doesn't try to pretend try to skirt outside their wheelhouse, just staying within that estate space. And then beyond that, maybe just simply asking the question, as you're doing some kind of introductory conversation or meeting, just simply asking the question of, what kind of process does your firm have to really support this, becoming a long-term relationship for me, and not just, someone that's just going to draft my plan and then I have to reach out to in 15 years when I need to make changes. I think people will know with how that attorney responds as to whether, whether or not that would be a good fit for them. Because I also think that there's a lot of people that do look at this as a transaction, that they don't want this to turn into this, long-term relationship. So I don't want to dismiss those people either. But what I do know is when there is that open line of communication, when there is that relationship, that is going to minimize mistakes in the estate planning space, period. So I think that answers
As you mentioned earlier, there's so many different titles for attorneys. There's the criminal law attorney, there's the estate attorney, there's elder care attorney, there's, the list goes on, family law. What is the main difference between an estate and an elder care attorney?
Yeah, I love this question. And I love this question because so many times, like when clients come out of my conference room, there's like my big sign that says Indiana Estate and Elder Law. And they'll say, what is elder law anyways? Is it helping old people like me? And they always chuckle. And I'm like, actually, no. If I'm doing like a power of attorney, if I'm doing a will for someone that is 95 years old, that is not elder law. That is still estate planning. What elder law is it is bringing into the conversation, or like weaving into our meetings, kind of this lens of, okay, let's look ahead in terms of incapacity. So I help people all the time navigate, like, okay, can this person just sign a power of attorney? Does this person warrant potentially a conservatorship or a guardianship? That's always a last resort, but unfortunately, sometimes that's our only option. So really navigating that incapacity space of, does this person have the capacity to sign these documents? The other side of the elder law equation is really helping people navigate how to pay for long-term care. when they don't listen to people like you and they do not get long-term care insurance and their family comes scrambling to me because they find out when their mom, dad, whoever is in rehab at a nursing home, and they find out how expensive it's going to be. And they come flailing into my office wanting to know what their options are. And so an elder law attorney is also going to be able to help someone really navigate what the options are to pay for long-term care, whether it's private pay, whether, that meaning, taking your checkbook out and paying that 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12,000 a month. Or do we want to look at benefits like Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid? So an elder law attorney is going to bring that into the equation of how do we protect assets against losing our assets against those long-term care costs? Do we want to mess with Medicaid? Do we not? Any old estate attorney is not going to navigate that conversation. Someone with an elder law experience is going to be the one that is equipped to handle that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it would be helpful for the audience to understand, like, what is the training or what is the expertise of becoming specialized in elder care?
Yeah. There are a couple different there's a certification as well as an organization that I'm going to drop out there. So the organization is called National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. It's a very well-respected national organization that we pride ourselves on bringing that elder law piece into the conversation. So if anyone's ever looking for or needing to find an attorney that does that elder law work, National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, they informally call it NAELA, Naela. I think it's naela.org is their website. They have an awesome feature on their website that it's like, find a lawyer, find an attorney, and you can just plug in your zip code and find a nearby attorney that is in that organization. What I always tell people is you're not going to pay to be in that organization if you're not doing elder law. It's expensive to stay in that organization. And they provide us a ton of different, not only education, but resources for one another. So if I have like a case that, maybe I helped a client get on Medicaid here in Indiana, but their family is about to move them to Michigan. I'm going to be going on the listserv on NAELA and say, hey, I need someone in such and such Michigan to help me be able to transition this Medicaid client from Indiana to Michigan and under their Medicaid process. So NAELA, great resource and organization for people looking for an elder law attorney. And then certifications, it's the CELA, CELA, Certified Elder Law Attorney, is also a great certification to look for. It is through the National Elder Law Foundation. It's basically a certification that someone can get where you essentially have to kind of go through some strenuous tests, have XYZ level of experience, and you'll ultimately get that certification. So CELA and NAELA kind of go hand in hand. And those would be great resources for listeners if you're looking for an elder law attorney.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think there's so much great benefit in having not only someone who specializes in estates, but also specializes in elder care, especially if you haven't even planned your long-term care plan yet. And it's like you're getting two birds with one stone with long-term care planning and estate planning all in one.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you've probably seen me post this on Twitter before. I always say that anyone that does elder law basically always does estate planning, but a lot of estate planning attorneys do not do elder law. And so it's a really, really important thing for people to know that if you want an attorney that is kind of looking at things from that lens, you really should be looking for someone that does that, like just don't assume that your estate attorney is going to be able to address these elder law considerations, because most estate attorneys are not going to touch elder law work with a 10-foot pole. They will refer out very quickly because Medicaid is a beast and it's difficult. It's a difficult process to navigate. That was a respectful way to say it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so if it's something that someone is, looking for an attorney, just really make sure they have that elder law experience, because most estate attorneys do not do elder law. It is definitely I'm going to call it a specialty that is brought to the table.
Yeah. I'm trying not to dive too much into Medicaid and the issue with Medicaid, but it's like it's a very gray line between when your expertise stops and where, when it's the next person's responsibility to carry on that role. Because, yeah, I am very educated on Medicaid, but I would never give people legal advice. So there's that like gray area between where my expertise goes and where it stops.
Yeah, and there's quite often, there's required collaboration between someone like you, someone like me, as well as someone, potentially a tax professional. Because if someone, once they understand their options, if someone's like, okay, we're interested in going the Medicaid route, a lot of times as part of that bigger picture plan, I have to move around assets like a crazy person. So I'm saying, Danielle, I need you to move the ownership from John and Jane Smith to John Smith. And I also need you to take that brokerage account and move it over here. Like, there's a lot of collaboration there that I think that's probably a perfect example of why, most estate attorneys will run away from cases like that, because they know it's so complicated. And it's, I think, even showing that it requires such collaboration between a family's financial, legal, and tax professional to all be on the same page. That's like, exhibit A of how complicated it is. It's not impossible, but it's not a walk in the park either. That's for sure.
But this is why it's so important to ask your tax professionals, your financial professionals, your estate professionals, do you mind collaborating with these people? Is this part of the service that you're providing? Because you may need those services.
Yeah. Yeah. And even more specifically, how will I get charged with all of those conversations? Because, someone like me, my office, we do everything flat fee. I can't promise every estate and elder law attorney is going to do flat fees, but there's a lot of communication that happens when we're going through a Medicaid process, with not just the client, with the professionals as well. So not only asking, about like, are you okay with, are you used, maybe not okay, but, are you used to collaborating with multiple professionals, and what is expectations from, fees and paying? Because I would venture to say there's even some attorneys that will do things hourly, and there's a lot of time. I can promise everyone that there's a lot of time and conversations that happen through that.
And the money adds up if it's hourly.
Oh my
I've
goodness,
quickly seen how attorney fees can just like go from very, very minimum to wowza.
Yeah, I actually, anytime, I mean, our Medicaid fees, they're not cheap. But anytime I have a client that kind of is like, well, that's kind of steep, I'm like, if you want me to do it hourly, I can do it hourly. And they're like, no, 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 no. and, and it's like, well, it's, I understand why some attorneys do it hourly, because Medicaid is such a crazy place sometimes that there are times where my fee has probably, not been enough for the time that we put into a case. I just kind of win some, lose some sort of thing. So I understand why some attorneys do it hourly. But anytime someone kind of, gawks at my fee, I'm like, if you would like us to do it hourly, I'm more than happy to do so. And they typically don't.
And then they go say no.
Yeah, they're like, okay, I'll take the flat fee.
So as we wrap up this live, what is one misconception that people have about the estate planning process?
Oh, just one?
Well, you could do
Whew.
3 if you like, but I don't know how many you have on your list.
Oh my gosh. I'll do the biggest one, the hands down biggest one that I hear. Okay, I'll do two. The first one that I hear all the time is people think when you do a will, it avoids probate. I hear that all the time. People will say, well, I thought because I had a will, I wouldn't have to go through probate. No, probate happens if you have no will at all, or if you have just a will, and and we're relying on that will to get assets from point A to point B. So from deceased person to beneficiary. So one big misconception is people think wills do not avoid probate, or do not avoid probate, and no, hold on. Wills avoid probate. There we go. That wills avoid probate, and they certainly do not. And quite often we're actually having to take wills through probate. That's one big misconception. And the other big one is kind of microscopic, but it's something I hear all the time. And maybe it's a little fun nugget people take away. When I was blabbing earlier about those basic documents, and I very quickly mentioned a document called a living will. People think a living will is a last will and testament. They'll call my office and they'll say, I need to update my living will. And they're totally meaning a last will and testament. But I just think it's because the two documents, they sound so similar. So a living will is a healthcare document, has nothing to do with assets or anything like that. It's your last will and testament is the thing people are meaning to say when they say, I need to update my living will. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious to hear, as we wrap up, your thoughts about, should we be scared of probate? I feel like probate is like the scary word no one wants to hear.
I know. Again, I'm taking a different approach, a different opinion than a lot of attorneys. Well, first of all, I should say probate differs by state. I have heard California is a roller coaster. I like roller coasters. It is not a fun roller coaster. Like there are some states where like probate is very stereotypically known to be like terrible. There are some states that probate is not so bad. So my first thing is it kind of depends on your state as to how bad probate is. For my state and a lot of states like Indiana, what I always tell people, you'll never find me using like some weird scare tactic, fear tactic. That is not how I roll at all. I come from a place of education, and from there, clients can choose whether they care about it or not. What I always tell people is probate comes with 3 non-negotiables. The 3 non-negotiables are time. It's not going to happen overnight. It is probably minimally going to take like 9 months to a year. There's no minimum. So the longest
unless you're in California.
Yeah, exactly. The longest one I've ever worked on was 6 years, and that was still uncontested. So time is non-negotiable, number 1. Non-negotiable number 2 is that it's public record. So if you care about your nosy neighbor Nancy getting online to see, who's in your will and who's getting what, then maybe that's something you give a hoot about. Third is cost. It cracks me up when lawyers try to say probate cost. It's the legal fees. They're trying to say probate cost, but it's primarily the legal fees. Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know what word to use. Your executor has to hire an attorney to go through that process. So we've essentially kind of monopolized that market. And, the legal fees for probate, depending on the state again, sometimes they're set by statute. Sometimes they're not. And so sometimes the fees are a little bit like the wild, wild west. But if you find someone that's super reasonable, those are the three non-negotiables. If someone doesn't care too much about time, doesn't really care about the public record piece, and they find someone that, will do it at a reasonable fee, then that's what probate is. I do probate all the time in Indiana, and I've never stepped foot in a courthouse. It is just a big paperwork shuffle, and it takes some time. There's fees they pay me. It is what it is. So yeah, that's what probate. It's a court process. You got those non-negotiables, and from there it just kind of depends on what a family's trying to accomplish.
Well, thank you again. I think after this conversation, I'm moving to Indiana because they have much simpler process in California.
And lower cost of living, just saying.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for educating us about estate planning and what we should be aware of.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I can't believe it's already been an hour. Wow. I hope I didn't blab the whole time.
No, I thought it was great. Thank you. It was very insightful.
Good. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.